Welcome to Cancel Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Hi and welcome back to Cancel Culture. I am joined today by Ben. We're recording slightly later this week on a Friday, so we have got a lot to get through. There's been lots and lots of good news stories this week. But first up, Ben, how are you? How's your week been?
Yeah, not too bad. I had a bit of holiday last week, going down to the south of France, where I'm fortunate enough to have my dad. And the weather was pretty good, which I think would upset anyone that's been in the UK for the last month. But yeah, come back, ducked between showers, and yeah, it's been good, not too bad. I'm off to the US next Saturday for one of my regular visits. So excited about that. So enjoying a couple of weeks in London between trips. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. It's been a busy week. I've got some great guests lined up for upcoming podcast episodes. So
Not
stay
today, though.
tuned. Well, not present company excluded,
Yeah.
obviously. Yeah, so I am chatting to a couple of people next week, so I'm really excited about that. And then yeah, I think it's just that time of year where we're planning and looking ahead to the rest of the year and kind of setting goals with the team. And yeah, it's actually sunny where I am today as well. So it's Friday and it's sunny. And I'm looking forward to a good chat with you now. All right, so we're going to kick off with the news that has kind of dominated headlines. I heard somebody's BBC Breaking go off yesterday in the phone in the office. Immediately went onto the website and saw that former Prince Andrew has been arrested, or was arrested yesterday, accused of misconduct in public office. We're not going to spend too much time digging into the details of this, but there's been an interesting piece in The Lawyer discussing how Republic, the campaign group that is seeking the abolition of the monarchy, has claimed responsibility for the arrest. And Ben, we wanted to just kind of touch on this for a moment, didn't we, before digging into other stories?
We did. I mean, we always look for law firm, legal industry angles with everything. And as you say, Prince Andrew is denied any, the former Prince Andrew is denied any wrongdoing. So we're not going to go into what that is. What I did read this piece, and basically you think that what they are claiming is that the report that they sent to the police was the catalyst for Andrew's arrest. If you read the piece, it looks like all they did was send some press clippings across. So they just trawled through the media and sent some stuff across. But hey ho. But I think kind of more importantly, I've been listening to some analysis from a legal perspective on the situation and the misconduct. And I think you sort of half joked at the beginning about details, but that's the point. No one knows what they are. The misconduct in public office apparently is a very, very complicated thing to bring from a prosecution perspective, and it takes a long time to even get there. We're all familiar with the world of sort of corporate investigations and things like that, and we know that they move very, very slowly by necessity, and these are no different. So the thing that really has taken I was listening to Charlie Faulkner on the Rest of Politics on my commute on the way in this morning. He was basically saying that he's been really surprised by how quickly the arrest has happened, because normally it takes a long time to get here, and you can interpret that any way you want. It may be just a statement that nobody is above the law. And in fact, if you look at what the King has said, and I thought his communications was excellent yesterday, the King has exactly said that. He has said that the law must take its course. So, we're hearing a lot at the moment about the people being above the law and, US politics sort of not really observing the rule of law. Whatever is going on here, the law is front and center. There has to be a really good thing. But the other thing is really not much has happened. He's been arrested and questioned and let go. So there's an awful lot of column inches, broadcast time, etc., dedicated to not a lot. So let's see what transpires.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing I was thinking was quite interesting about this as well was, as you say, once you dig into it, I mean, he's already, as of today, he's kind of been released. And from an optics perspective, this has been an incredibly powerful move by Republic, regardless of whether or not anything comes of it. Private prosecution as a tactic in these sorts of cases seems to be quite beneficial for those bringing them. How common, or do you think we'll see this kind of picking up as a strategy going forward?
There have been some high-profile ones. I mean, Mike Lynch was subject to one here, kind of at the same time or just before the big one in the States. The optics of being subject to, I think they are, you know, if you are if you are at the wrong end of a private prosecution, I think it's lose-lose. If you lose the private prosecution, you're lost. You've lost, you know, and you're guilty in the eyes of in the court of public opinion. If you win, people will say, well, it wasn't a proper case because it was a private prosecution. So from optics, PR perspective, you don't really want to be on the wrong end of one of those. Whether they will become more prevalent or not, I don't know. One assumes that you need quite a lot of money to bring one, or funding and all that kind of stuff. So I would have thought the complexity of getting to a point where there is a private trial, private prosecution is quite difficult. Whether it will increase, I'm not sure. But one thing is for sure, that you know, the PR around them can be substantial.
And next up, I think we've been speaking a little bit over the past kind of couple of months since the start of the year about the market picking up potentially, both from an M&A and an IPO perspective. And we saw this piece on law.com from James Jackson, which is digging into, yes, mega mergers are happening, but what happens when they fall apart?
Well, first of all, it's a really good piece. And I would urge anybody that's involved in law firm BD, law firm comms, to read it, because it gives a real insight into how fees are structured on M&A on M&A transactions. I know a little bit about this, having been a sort of who were built around M&A for quite some time, and the observations I would make that are not necessarily conveyed in the piece are: the first one is when you have a big M&A deal or a bid that your firm is advising on, the whole firm mobilizes. So if you look at it, you need obviously M&A lawyers, you need tax lawyers, you probably need employment lawyers, pensions, clearly, etc., etc. So representatives from every kind of legal department really often get involved with with an M&A deal. And again, our comms listeners will know that when they write in a big M&A press release, when they have to list the team, boy, you get a long list, and that's the point. So firms and often bids transpire very quickly. So the mobilization that needs to happen in a law firm to be able to service the client quickly is significant. It's not like, I don't know, if you get like a very complicated tax matter, you basically lock some tax lawyers in a room and they work it out, advise, and it's quite isolated work. Even big disputes, I would argue, are generally handled by disputes partners and disputes teams that's sort of contained within a department. But M&A is completely different. And I think that's a really important point. The disruption to a firm, not disruption, but the need to really come together very quickly, and a lot of time is key there. And often you might do that, and then the bid happens and then it falls over like the next day. So do read that piece in law.com, because it talks about how firms hedge against that happening. Things like break fees, end fees, whatever there might be, guarantees, all that kind of stuff. And I think it's absolutely worth reading for anybody that needs to have any sort of knowledge, indirectly or not, about pricing within a firm. Big firms like my old place and others have really good teams full of clever people working out pricing models. It's not just the partners who decide how to price something. The piece talks about projected fees. So firms will have to quote. But what are they quoting on? If the deal falls over the next day, and there's some really good teams of pricing professionals in firms that do this stuff. It's not just about billable hours and project fees and things. It's not as simple as that. Really complex. pricing M&A transactions, because of not least the uncertainty in my mind, the significant amount of mobilization that needs to happen very, very quickly. It's not like a dispute where you're building up to it, and you're doing all the research and all that sort of stuff. Often, well, you might, and probably even more so if you're acting for the target, because suddenly a bid will come out of nowhere, and you have to mobilize very, very quickly.
Yeah, and yeah, just to add to that, I think where the importance here is that kind of stakeholder management, right? Within any very, very complex situation with huge fees and a lot of risk, having open, transparent conversations with the client about the pricing structure, what happens when it goes wrong, and really kind of playing out those scenarios so there isn't any surprises at the end. So you've kind of mapped out what happens if the deal goes through, what happens if it falls over, as you say, and just maintaining that open communication with the client to avoid getting into a situation where you're sending a bill through for a deal that hasn't actually made it through to completion. So yeah, the client management side as well as the fee structure, I would kind of add is super important in these instances.
I think you raise a really good psychological point as well, that if you are landed with a big bill you're not expecting, and you've just, as a company, frankly, wasted a lot of time trying to do something, and it hasn't happened, and you're feeling a bit knocked about that, and you're going to get a big old bill from lawyers. I think it's quite a key point, right?
And I think we just wanted to touch on news as well that Linklaters has signed a new lease to add yet more additional square footage to its New York office. I think it's 48,000 on top of another expansion that happened not so long ago. Link's obviously doing quite well in New York. And yeah, I think it's a positive story and raises a couple of interesting questions as well about office space as a whole and the signal that that's sending to market, because I don't think they're the only firm in kind of recent months that have said, look, we're taking on a massive amount of new office space, perhaps still at a time when debate about return to office is ongoing. So yeah, no, another interesting piece, this time from law.com.
Yeah, I think a couple of interesting things with this story. One, let's talk about Linklaters. Clearly, A&O with the merger and Freshfields have sort of dominated the headlines of Magic Circle or former Magic Circle firms growing in the US. But clearly, Linklaters have quietly been doing really, really well. And you just don't hear them talked about in the context of the US as much as Freshfields and obviously A&O, Sherman, etc. So interesting to see how they are doing, and some good bullish comments there from the management saying, if there is office space available, we need it, and we look at it. But what else is interesting is, if you take a step back, I went to, I think as regular listeners will know, I go to New York fairly regularly to see clients and things. I remember going there not that long ago, 3 years or so, and it was dead in terms of people around. So Hudson Yards, which is where everybody is moving to. I mean, Cravath have moved there in the last year. Milbank Cooley, lots of firms are in and around Hudson Yards, which is a thriving, quite high end area. We're going there, and it was very new. It looked like a ghost town, kind of 3 years or so ago. So this mobilization and this targeting of office spaces is relatively new. There used to be a lot of worries about real estate in New York, real worries until very recently that it would just fall over and hit the economy significantly, but that doesn't really seem to be the case at the moment. In terms of in the office debate, etc., the sense I get from going into offices of US firms in the US is that they are generally a bit more sparsely populated than they are here. And maybe just the average lawyer needs more space in the US than they do here. And they generally are slightly more quieter environments, really. But it's very, very good to see this, I think.
And do you think that, how many firms are growing into their new office spaces, so it's a kind of quite a bullish play for future growth, and how many are outgrowing their current offices? I think it seems to be a bit of a mix to me.
Yeah, it's if we go back to London, in it was extraordinary the amount of firms that signed chunky, expensive deals just before COVID hit. if you remember, big commitments to big office spaces, and then the world changed to net working from home, etc., etc. So there were quite a few firms in London that were very, very worried because they'd committed a lot of money to expensive space, but the way of working changed, hugely, significantly, and very, very quickly. But that all seems to have calmed and rectified now. And you don't really read too much about, big sweeping office moves. I mean, Links have just moved here too, so they've obviously got quite a big budget, but you don't really read too much about big law firm office moves, etc. We seem to have had a burst of it, and it's gone relatively well.
We also spotted a really interesting piece in the FT this week, which poses questions about how reasonable a certain amount of sleep is for jobs that perhaps historically have been known to be either all-nighters or very, very disruptive to a normal working pattern. So this is a particular case that's been brought against Centerview Partners from an employee that she basically negotiated 9 hours sleep per night because of a diagnosed mood and anxiety disorder. A really, really interesting one that, the fact that I think it's made in the piece that the fact this has even made it to trial makes it unusual. But the facts of the case raise some important questions about the evolution of these professions and, are we going to start to see some changes?
It's a pretty thorough article, isn't it? And slightly unusually, I would urge our listeners to read the reader comments below it. Some really, really thoughtful comments by former investment bankers, former lawyers from big law firms, all of them saying the same thing, that when they started their careers, pulling an all-nighter was a bit of a kind of thrill. But once you do it a lot, you know it has a detrimental effect on your health, and you ask yourselves, what's the point? I think what's interesting about this is for the judge to make an informed decision, they're going to have to really get under the skin of investment banking. What happens at 3 a.m. that can't happen at 8, for example? So they're going to have a very good knowledge of the industry to be able to make an informed decision. And I would urge them not to watch industry to get to that point, which we were talking about before. But it does ask quite soul-searching questions, doesn't it? That if you are any kind of organization, and you have a way of working and a way of doing things, if somebody has a disability of some form which precludes them from doing something in a way that is culturally normal for that company or industry, how do you manage that? All employers wrestle with that, a little bit. Even in our PR, anyone involved in PR, has to do a lot of reading very quickly, often quite early in the morning, to be across stuff for the day. If you're not able to do that, then you might struggle. And all of us have to ask these questions. I think it's a really, really important test case. But you do wonder what does actually go on in the middle of the night that can't happen in the early in the morning, or sort of a slightly more civilized point in the evening. And if this individual wins, what will it mean for the investment banking industry, and knock-on effect to law firms as well? Let's see.
And next to another case that caught our eye, but for slightly different reasons. This is a litigation. It's a 1.2 million claim from a couple that are alleging their construction on their lovely flat is causing them issues, in specifically the toilet. Ben, I think we always like to look out for slightly more unusual stories. This one is is quite bizarre, not least to say because the projected legal costs are double that of the claim. What are your
So,
thoughts?
so this is Jonathan Ames in the Times is covering this, and I'm sure is enjoying it immensely. So, in really, really basic terms, a couple are suing Berkeley Homes or some subsidiaries of Berkeley Homes because they bought a luxury flat, and the toilet, they argue, is at such an angle that you run the risk of falling off it forwards, which I don't really need to say too much about. And the question I have, and it amuses me greatly, is how do you prove it? Do you have to bring the loo to the court? I, I don't know. I mean, it's hilarious, isn't it? So,
Yeah, you can
well,
imagine some quite interesting demonstrations of
yeah.
of that, them carting it in. But yeah, no, I have absolutely no idea. Hopefully we'll find out more.
And unlike the last story, I would urge listeners not to read the reader comments below it because they are full of comments that you can imagine that are scatological and bad puns. So
Oh, we'd love a bad pun though. I might have to dig in.
we do. So I'm going to resist making any dad jokes about loos and things. But it's quite
Excellent.
funny. And let's see how it transpires. It will genuinely be quite interesting to see how the various representations are made in court. What do you think?
And our final story for today, quite an exciting development from Taylor Wessing that has announced that to a certain extent, announced that it's seeking external investment to grow its own startup funding platform, which is called Outpaced. This is a piece in The Lawyer by Ben Lucas. It raises really interesting questions about the law firm model going forward, and additional private equity investment into firms.
Yeah, Taylor Wessing clearly are a firm with a lot of momentum behind them, aren't they? I mean, they made a big hire this week. They're in the merger is going through, and I think it's really significant. This taking a step back, law firms are now making things that people want to invest in. If you look at anyone that's worked on any brand with law firms, it always comes down to people and minds, and that's it. But that's changing. If law firms are now making things, from a technological perspective that people are wanting to invest in, that really makes them eventually very different types of businesses than they historically have been. And I think this is really exciting. And from the point of view of investment, clearly, I don't think I think I'm pretty safe ground to say that Taylor Wessing are not going to be looking for any private equity investment anytime soon, given their merging. But if you are a private equity firm or some form of investor in a law firm, it's not just the people that you are investing in now, is it? It's their ability to make, to harness technology, to consolidate the use of technology, and to actually create technology as well. I think this is really important, and I'd be excited to see which type of investor they look at. I do have a sixth sense that this piece was probably slightly earlier than the firm may have wanted, but that's fine. And let's see what happens. But I do think this is a really, really significant development. I mean, you rewind a few years, and law firms were creating incubators and things where they were funding legal tech, etc., and things. But clearly now that's moved on, and they're now making things. So exciting.
That's it for this week's Council Culture. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks, Ben. Look forward to speaking again soon.
Thanks, Lindsay.
You've been listening to Council Culture, the Business of Law podcast brought to you by Byfield. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and join us again next week, where we'll be discussing some more of the biggest stories in the legal sector.